Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at our Archives Invites online series. This evening's topic is Sound as Cultural Archive. We're happy to have with us Dr. Marcus Tan, an assistant professor at the National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University. He's currently working with us to expand and develop SoundscapeSG as an archive of Singapore sounds. His research specialization includes sound studies and soundscapes in theatre. He also examines intercultural theatre and the politics of cultural practice, and he has published many books and journal articles in these areas. He is also the Secretary General of the International Federation for Theatre Research, IFTR, convener of the Music Theatre Working Group at the IFTR, and the Associate Editor of the Journal of Interdisciplinary Voice Studies. I'll now pass the session on to Dr. Tan. Dr. Tan, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time off to be here. I'd like to begin by thanking the National Archives and the National Library Board for this invite, and also for the opportunity to speak to everyone here about something which has always intrigued me and has become a core aspect of my research and vocation as an academic. I'll try to make this session as interactive as possible. I won't have slides because I thought having visual slides sort of becomes contradictory to what I'm trying to promote, which is orality or a sense of listening. So I'll try to make the session as interactive as possible within the limits of this medium, of course. There'll be certain segments in which I will pose a question. So if you can, I'll be grateful if you could just type in your response in the chat box. So please feel free to respond. There will also be parts that will be a little technical and scholarly, so I do apologize in advance. But I see this as an opportunity to share my learning with all of you, and I hope it enthuses and enlightens you in some small way. So here's the first interactive part. I'm going to begin by asking a really simple question. Some of us have thought about this more, others maybe not. What is the difference to you between sound and music? So if I can have some responses on the chat box, I'll be really grateful. So anyone has any views on the difference between sound and music? Oh, I see noise. Okay, sound is random, music is deliberate. It's moving really. Music has a melody, music is organized. Sound is random, sound is incidental, music is purposeful. Music is organized sound, music is prearranged. Organized sound versus sound that is random. Wonderful, thank you so much. And you're mostly right? So these are conventionally understood definitions between sound and music. So we have music that is organized sound based on the principles of rhythm, melody, harmony, and of course it must be performed. So ethnomusicologists will underscore the importance of music in cultures and music making as a primary human activity. So you hear a lot about music, right? Being an ordered, pleasant to the ears, and the intention behind ordering sound is, of course, undeniable. But if you do a Google search for what is sound, on the other hand, you see that primarily the scientific definitions are foregrounded. Whereas if you do one for music, and then you get all the other kinds of definitions of music itself, beyond the fact that it's organized sound. So if you Google what is sound, you get things like it's a form of energy, vibration of air molecules through a medium. They move in a wave pattern. It's an audible mechanical wave produced from some vibrating body. And most of us are able to appreciate music for the many pleasures or joys it brings and for the musicality itself. We also recognize the importance of music in human culture, but the interesting question is how many of us do actually appreciate or even recognize the unorganized and uncomposed, like what you call random sounds that some of you mentioned, all these sounds that surround us. Or do we even pay attention to them and consider how they impact our lived experiences every day? I had actually intended, if this were a physical face-to-face presentation, to pause here for about half a minute and then just to create a curious, awkward silence and to cause some confusion among you as to what's happening. It doesn't work on a digital medium, obviously, because people will think that my screen just froze up and there's a technical glitch. But in any case, I would have done that not just for dramatic effect, but to have you in your discomfort begin to hopefully listen to the surrounding sounds. And the point of the exercise would really be to have us examine how frequently we ignore the audible vibrations that compose our immediate acoustic environment, that contribute significantly to our experience of the immediate present, and a sense of place and space. This is of course not new and would simply be a repetition of American avant-garde composer John Cage's infamous piece 433, in which some of you may be familiar with. It's a work that interrogates the concept of composed music, and it was meant to attune the audience's oral attention to the accidental and ambient sounds around that can equally be constituted as music. So in its premiere in 1952, by the way, pianist David Tudor sat at the piano and simply opened and closed the keyboard lid to mark the beginning and end of each movement. And there was actually technically no music paid for that performance. So for Cage, there is no such thing as silence because there is always sound, or what we at times term noise. And how we perceive something to be noise is really, as Paul Hegarty argues, a judgment about sound, and that judgment very frequently is culturally rooted. So too frequently we attune our ears to music, but we filter out intentionally or otherwise what is noise or simply sound, because we don't regard it very much with meaning. So the most recent example can be found in our own lived experiences during the circuit breaker, our version of the lockdown. You may have read this on social media or heard about it, even discussed this with a friend. There were several observations made about the acoustic environment in Singapore. Many commented how quiet it had become, and it's highly unusual for Singapore. There was less traffic noise, less street noise, less urban noise, especially the ones coming from the incessant construction or roadworks. Those seem to be a sonic characteristic of our country. Everything had become quiet, and strangely enough, such that we needed to fill the uncomfortable silence with music. And so what did we do? We sang Home to our neighbors in other blocks. For some, the new quiet unnerved. For others, it was a pleasing respite. But that quietening was a revelation of the sounds we have become accustomed to hearing and treating as inconsequential, white noise as it were. So somehow we felt we needed to make music in that period of imposed silence. We have become accustomed to the urban sounds of traffic and industry that it is no longer worthy of conscious attention. And we ironically only recognize their presence when they are absent. Incidentally, and just to sidetrack a little, it wasn't just Singapore that became quiet. In fact, the world became quieter in what some scientists have termed the period of the Great Seismic Quiet. So in a scientific study, seismic observations were made around the world by scientists, and they used seismometers during the Great Lockdown period. Because of the reduced noise from trains, industry, and airplanes, the scientists noted that the Earth vibrated less. And because of that, there was a kind of global quietening of high-frequency seismic noise as well. So returning to the comparison between music and sound, most of us will agree that music has what some musicologists term extra musical meaning or referentialist meaning. So in other words, music is able to connote meaning, oftentimes this being an emotional or affective one. The cliche that music is the language of emotions is of course a very commonly heard expression and understood as well by many. Music's ability to carry and convey emotional meaning is one of the reasons why we make music, we listen to it intently, and we appreciate it so much. But can we say the same about sound and noise? And does sound have extra sonic or referential meaning? And so here it's going to be a bit interactive again. I'm going to play a few sounds that are taken from various sources. And these are sounds that you can hear in Singapore. Some are a bit more iconic and distinctive than others. So we're going to play 3 sounds, and my co-host Paylin will help me do that in a while. Our instinct is to essentially identify the sound, which is perfectly fine. It's sort of instinctual even. But beyond that, I'd like you at this moment to be more aware of what that sound means to you. You can think about what accompanying emotions there may be, sensations, even possibly memories or associations. So we're going to have the first sound right now. And if you can just put your thoughts in the chat box, feel free to do so as well. So we're going to have the first sound right now. We're going to play about 30 to 40 seconds of it. So I'm going to just ask Paylin to help me with this. So Paylin, play the first sound. Okay, so that was the first sound. If you didn't catch it, it was actually inside an MRT station. Oh, sorry, an MRT train, what am I saying? And of course, the train is moving, right? Somebody put his air conditioner, actually not quite. We'll have the second sound, but like I said, more importantly, think about the kind of accompanying meanings, as it were, associations that these sounds have for you. So we'll have the second sound. Paylin, can you play that second sound for me, please? Thank you. Okay, I'm seeing some very interesting responses to the MRT train, associations of it being a sense of tiredness because you associate it with going to work. Somebody commented that after the lockdown, when he went back to taking the train again, the announcement sounded completely different. So the second one, as you can already tell, is of course the Garangkuni man, right, which is not very commonly heard anymore. So we'll have the third one. This one's going to be a bit difficult to identify, but let's try anyway. And then if you're able to identify, obviously, then the associations begin. But even if it doesn't, let's see what kinds of ideas come to you. So Paylin, could you please play the third sound? Thank you. Okay, I'm smiling because I'm just reading some of the comments from some of you. They're not actually; those are actually not birds. They're actually otters. They are the otters chirping. That's how otters sound. But I see some associations that were quite interesting as well, with association of the last sound with sensations of peace, for example, right? But the last one was actually otters. So, arguably, therefore, while sound from a scientific perspective is simply natural phenomena, it is distinctly affective, as some of you have just experienced, in the ways that it impacts your mood, feelings, attitudes. So we can just think of how the calming rhythms of the ocean waves affects you as opposed to the sounds of drilling concrete. So the strong annoyance you experience by certain unpleasant sounds, such as fingernails on a blackboard, has a distinctly physiological and neurological basis, and the condition is called Grimmer, by the way. So we recognize those, right? But sounds certainly have very real, material, physical, and phenomenological effects, as we've just mentioned, but they also hold cultural value and meaningfulness, as some of you have already recognized. They're not just white noise, as it were. The perception of sound distinctly fashions our understanding and knowing of the world. Sound also becomes meaningful because it is socially encoded with significance, like our MRT train. In sound studies, the way one experiences and knows the world through sound is known as acoustemology. It's a portmanteau of the terms acoustic and epistemology. So in other words, it's a kind of acoustic knowing of sounding as a condition of and for knowing of sonic presence and awareness as potent shaping forces in how people make sense of experiences. So in his own research, which examined the importance of sound to the Kaluli people of Papua New Guinea, anthropologist Stephen Feld explains how the sounds of water in the jungle not only influence the type of music that the Kaluli people performed, but the sounds of nature also influence the tribe's people's breathing. And the acoustic ecology provided sense, embodiment, and synesthesia. And of course, there's several research, there's a lot of research done in terms of soundscapes and the kind of cultural impact they have. So in another research, Bruce Smith examines the acoustic world of early modern England to show how not simply music, but the soundscapes of bells, the vendors' cries, the emergent industrial noise of the city, and that was the early modern period, contrasted with the quieter acoustic horizons of the country, and how these demarcated very public, private spaces, and of course impacted the social, cultural, and political climate of the time. So there has been an increasing body of research done with regards to sound's meaningfulness to various societies and communities. In Singapore, several incidents in the recent past remind us of how acceptable or unacceptable sounds delineate our cultural and political environment. So in 2019 was the first year since 1973 that Hindu devotees could perform percussion instruments during Thaipusam procession at more designated points and within specific hours, of course. And of course, today is Thaipusam. The ban on the performance of music during Thaipusam specifically restricts singing or music, gongs, drums, playing of music-producing equipment during the procession, on the basis that loud live music could lead to public disorder. Now, beyond the legal rhetoric and social intention, this act was, of course, a reflection of how segments of society regarded religious sounds as what we call noise. Noise that could invoke real transformative violence. Sound participates at every level of the Hindu cosmos, and it is a key concept in Hindu theology. The Hindu world is permeated by sound. So this once silencing of a religious festival reveals in many dimensions how contemporaneity, multiculturalism, urbanization, high population density reconstruct our oral sensibilities and permissibilities as well. There are many other examples of what we call kind of sonic autocracy, which in turn determines what a society should or should not hear, and when it can or cannot hear. So for example, loudspeakers in Singapore mosque, as you know, are turned inward. Activities likely to create noise nuisance cannot be carried out after 10:30 p.m. There are laws against making excessive noise on public transport. And interestingly enough, last year, I just found this out. Last year, someone contributed a forum piece to the Straits Times requesting that the Land Transport Authority ban commuters from playing religious music out loud on trains and buses, even if these were played on their personal devices. So on the other hand, we're given permission to hear the piercing engines of F1 race cars, the explosive pops of fireworks, and the cymbals and drums of lion dances, which we will hear more of in the next few weeks. So in another survey done by the Institute of Policy Studies in 2019, religious chanting or praying were among the loud events at void decks and common areas that people were put off by, interestingly enough. Likewise, xenophobia has a distinctly sonic quality. Otherness is not simply seen but heard, particularly in today's increasingly intercultural and interethnic world. Sound, specifically vocality and vocalization, marks the insiders from the outsiders in any society. In Singapore, the relatively high population of immigrants has certainly transformed, for example, the acoustic ecology of neighborhoods, such as Tiong Bahru and Holland Village. This phenomenon has also impacted a Singaporean sense of self. For very frequently, a sense of I becomes very salient and obvious only in the presence of the other or the you, right? And Singaporeanness as a lived concept today is something that is heard in the Singapore accent, in Singlish, in the sonorities and the sounds that the other cannot produce, or rather the foreigner cannot produce. And listening to difference was something I had to negotiate with in my years living in Ireland, both in the Republic and the North. Admittedly, it was at times difficult to understand what my Northern Irish students were saying, and my request to have them repeat what they were articulating became a kind of source of embarrassment for me. But it was also an audible reminder and signifier of cultural diversity. Actually, in one semester, a student wrote, "This lecturer has an accent." This was the end of semester feedback. And that comment is interesting because that person didn't recognize that he or she had an accent as well, right? So the years there also allowed me to be more attuned to a different acoustic ecology. An acoustic ecology comprises of the sounds one hears in a particular sound environment and the effects of the environment on the physical or behavioral characteristics of those living within it. So broadly speaking, it's a study of the relationships and interactions between the inhabitants of an environment that is mediated through sound. So the soundscapes of Dublin and Belfast are distinct from Singapore and also, of course, from each other, even though they are modern cosmopolitan cities. And modern technology has a way of homogenizing the acoustics of urban cities in the same way that McDonald's does. The location, presence, and absence of sounds affected my sense of place and belonging. The bird calls, the sound of the rain, and it rains a lot in Belfast, but the texture of the rain is different. So the kind of sound that it produces is also quite different. So these became an audible reminder that I was in a foreign place. But at some point, I observed that I was no longer observing the sonic differences, and it was sort of then that I realized I had become part of the ecology. So the varying sounds also mark the changing seasons, something that is not particularly experienced here. And I remember what intrigued me the most was the squishing sound of boots on snow. That seems to be a very ordinary oral experience for my colleagues, but it was quite annoying for me. And there's actually a scientific term for that annoyance. It's called Misphonia. Yet, despite the different oral experiences that shape our perception of reality and spatiality, when I heard the all too familiar ding of the iPhone text notification, I was reminded that Irish or Singaporean, we shared common practices and patterns of behavior. Unless, of course, if you are a Samsung user, then that's a different story. So my experience living abroad made me ponder more purposefully about Singapore's soundscapes. What are they essentially, and what are the soundscapes that are unique to Singapore? How are these sounds socially and culturally distinct? What are the sounds that are meaningful to the resident population and to Singaporeans, apart from National Day songs and, of course, the song Home? And importantly, why should we bother to find out or even archive these sounds? In soundscape studies, the distinctive sounds of an environment or culture is known as sound marks. So coined by Canadian composer and founder of the World Soundscape Project, Maurice Schaeffer. Sound marks are defined as sounds that are unique and of special significance to a community. This is opposed to what he terms keynotes, which are background sounds that emerge from the natural environment. There are also signals, foregrounded sounds composed to be listened to consciously. So sound marks then reflect the heritage and culture of a society, and they reveal a society's social, economic, political evolution. And here is an interesting example that I recalled just about 2 weeks ago. In 2017, news of some chickens being culled at Seismic made the headlines in all our local broadsheets, right? And there was a sort of a hoo-ha about it. The hoo-ha came because some thought these chickens that were culled were red jungle fowl or the endangered species, while others, such as the AVA, claimed that they were just free-ranging chickens. Whether these were just regular chickens or endangered fowl, the interesting debate for me was about why they were culled. And apparently they were culled because there were 20 complaints made by residents. Actually, only 20. And the residents complained about the noise, what they called noise, that the chickens make. The outcome, as we know, was that, of course, all 24 chickens were put down. But of course, like Jedi's, they made their return again. And in 2019, they made headlines once more. But this time, interestingly enough, the residents at Seismic voted to keep them, despite the complaints about the morning crows and cackling. The incident interestingly reveals how urban space shapes our sense of orality, and in some ways reshapes what we think is natural and unnatural, and what is permissible sound and what is noise. So sound reveals our community's relationship to the morphing physical, social, and economic landscape. The density of urban sounds, like car engines, moving elevators, and the one that annoys me the most, air-conditioned condensers. And the diminishing natural sounds, like bird calls, the sound of rustling leaves because of the wind, the crickets and the cicada calls. These diminishing natural sounds reflect an increasingly built-up environment and a transformation of space that in turn mirrors the psychological stresses of living in such concrete environments. Increasingly, because of this, there's been a tendency for city dwellers to filter out noise and retreat into a controlled sonic environment of music, podcasts, and guided meditations. Listening has changed from a public experience to an increasingly private one, particularly with the invention of noise-cancelling headphones, like the ones that I'm wearing right now. We're always trying to cancel out sound we do not want. So the interesting questions are, what are we trying to cancel out and why? So likewise, the increasing frequency of mechanical sounds of tunneling and boring equipment, the excavators and the loaders, they become very common sonic signatures in Singapore compared to the 80s and 90s. And of course, they reverberate with the realities of the rapidly changing physical landscape. The sounds are metonymic of a society's eagerness for material progress, and frequently at the expense of social memory, heritage, and history. So just think about all the debates that we're having now about Dover Forest, Bukit Brown, and I'm also thinking about the former National Library. It was torn down, right? So recognizing sound's importance to a society's culture and heritage as such, sound is listed by UNESCO as a form of intangible cultural heritage. And in January every year, UNESCO celebrates this week of sound, or rather the week of sound. According to UNESCO, sound is important to all ages and permeates through economic, environmental, societal, medical, industrial, and cultural dimensions. It contributes to our individual and collective behavior, helping to shape the relationships we form with others. So remembering and recording sounds are as such vital for their historical artifacts that hold equal importance to documents, photographs, art, articles. Apart from oral history and of course music, we have not yet really come to appreciate the importance of sounds and soundscapes. And of course, that is what my research project in collaboration with the National Archives will seek to accomplish and promote. So SoundscapeSG will preserve oral memory through the conservation of sonic artifacts. It is both a sound library and a sound map, and serves the crucial purpose of collecting, storing, and documenting the distinct soundscapes of Singapore. Many Singapore sounds from the past are arguably lost and now only reside in individual memory. So I'd like to pause here again and get your participation to see if you can recall any sounds that you realize in the course of your years of living have disappeared altogether. This is a very curious, interesting exercise then. So I'd be grateful if you could contribute. So what do you think are the sounds that have disappeared and you no longer hear them, that you used to hear at least? Oh, Chinese opera, Ice Cream Man. Yes, the Talk Me. No others? Oh, kids running around at school. Oh, that's interesting. Yes, the payphone sound, the rotary phone darling, the honking of the bread van, ship's horns, railway train. Ah, the swallow. That's true. I didn't think about that. Badminton shoes squeaking, ball hitting void deck. Yes, because we cannot play ball games at the void deck anymore. Oh, that's true. The modem, that's a really interesting one. We don't use modems anymore. The dial-up sound of the modem. Our neighbors quarreling, I'm sure, is still around. Children fighting, possibly so. Dot matrix printer, that's interesting. I'm not quite sure what's chapte though. Okay, the night soil carrier. That was before my time actually. Crickets, fireflies. Yes, the sound of a pencil sharpener. Campfire, the telex machine, marbles. Nokia ringtone. Yes, the Asian call. I still hear it here though, although I admit it's becoming less frequent. I think they're going to disappear soon. Connecting computers. Malay weddings. Oh, that's interesting, because I just saw one the other day. Yes, the pager. Nobody really uses a pager anymore. Okay. Thank you so much for your contribution. Those are really, really interesting responses. Some of which I didn't really even think about, right? And my own missing sounds, of course, is the Garanguni, which we played earlier. It sort of has kind of nostalgic association for me. The other ones that some of you have mentioned as well is like the kokok mee seller who knocks on the bamboo sticks. And for me, it was the bells of the ice cream man, right? Because it reminds me a lot of my primary school days, which he used to haunt my primary school along Queen Street. And of course, the other one that was significant to me when I was growing up was the Chinese funerals that were processing down the road. And then of course, they slow the traffic down significantly, right? But you can hear all the instruments that are being played. And if you listen carefully, you can hear all the fake wailings and cries. Well, not all of them are fake, but anyway. So admittedly, these were already fading sounds when I was young, but it evidences, like the responses that I got, it evidences the power of sound in etching memory and functioning as a kind of mnemonic as well. So here's another example, and now Paylin will help me show the sketch of Sago Lane. So this is Sago Lane that was drawn by Singaporean artist Yip Biu Chong, and of course he recently sold out all his paintings that he painted of nostalgic scenes in Singapore. So you see here, it's a depiction of a memory he has of the street that he grew up in, which is also called the Street of the Dead. In Chinese, it's called Serenjie. Named so because of many funeral parlors and death-related shops that line the street. So what is interesting here is the artist's rendering of a memory that is so visually vibrant and full. But it also evokes a kind of very distinct soundscape that would have been unique to the acoustic ecology. So we're going to just have a quick look at the image here. And you see almost everything that he has depicted produces some kind of sound, right? So you have, on this corner here, you have, the bottom left corner, you have trishaw riders. Then you, let's go to the middle, the bottom, you see a Taoist priest conducting a ceremony there, right? And then to the left of them, you see two tables and they're playing mahjong. So that produces more sound, yeah? And then if you look at the shops, people making coffins, so all the sawing and the wooden sounds that you produce from knocking wood. And then the shop on the extreme right, you have somebody making paper effigies, right? So paper does obviously produce lots of sound. Then you look up and you have the neighbors looking down, presumably they are conversing, right? And on the ledge there, you see a cat, you see birds, and you see mice, right? This is it's beyond the fact that it's so visually vibrant. To me, what stands out the most is that it is a kind of soundscape that is so full and so dense, yeah, and so characteristic of a particular time and place, right? So, according to Yip, his experience of the nightly soundscape included the deafening gongs and the drums of the funeral procession, the chanting of Taoist priests, as you see in the image there, the ringing bells of the tourist trishaws. So it isn't just trishaws, the tourists talking or speaking, but of course the bells that the trishaw users used. Okay, there's also a shuffling, according to him, of the mahjong tiles, and of course he mentions wailing relatives. So this is a soundscape really unique to a place and time, but it also resonates with a community's cultural practice, tradition, heritage, and most importantly, identity. So SoundscapeSG currently has user-contributed sounds. So if you've not visited it, I invite you to have a look, and you can also contribute your own sounds. So my project, which is funded by the Ministry of Education through the Academic Research Fund, will help to collect distinctive Singapore soundscapes in higher fidelity. So these include sounds from a market, a hawker center, and of course now hawker culture has been added to UNESCO's list of intangible cultural heritage. So it will also include soundscapes of particular religious ceremonies, some sounds of Singapore's natural spaces, the MRT station, and among other sounds as well. The sounds will be recorded in an ambisonic format, which in other words means it's a 360-degree format. And this will be composed as an immersive soundscape. And the soundscape will be accompanied by a 360-degree image of each specific location. They will then be placed in SoundscapeSG for the public's use. So it's done in this particular ambisonic format to allow users to feel immersed in that location, and of course to kind of recreate a sense of spatial authenticity. There are many affordances that such immersive ambisonic formats bring about, but I won't go into them here. I invite you to experience the soundscapes for themselves when they're uploaded. So as a sound map, SoundscapeSG will provide an oral, spatial, or acoustic geography of Singapore for users to be informed and of the varying character and identity of specific locations. Because living in urban environments has led most of us to tune out to sound, or regard it with less nuance and treat it with very polarized reactions like loud, quiet, music, noise. So the sound map hopes to help amplify the rich diversity of sonicities that reverberate with Singapore's cultural heritage and identity. To close then, sound does not only shape our lived experiences, but also fosters a sense of place for individuals. As it was with my own experience living in Ireland, I realized that I actually miss hearing certain sounds, such as the annoying bleep of the green man at the pedestrian crossing, and it bleeps really fast, and it really pushes you to walk faster. And of course, the annoying call of the Asian call bird, which somebody brought up earlier. In his book, The Tuning of the Role, Murray Schafer states, we have no earlids, so we are condemned to listen. But this does not mean our ears are always open, according to him. The aspiration of SoundscapeSG then is that it will not simply be an archive, but an inspiration for our ears to be open, to listen and not simply hear, and to recognize the potential for metaphor and meaning in sounds, for sounds contain stories, and of course they are stories. Thank you everyone, and thank you for your kind attention.